Hey guys, tonight we wander through the flickering glow of a candle, a single trembling light against a world of shadows. The air smells faintly of linseed oil and burning tallow. You hear the quiet scratch of a brush against canvas, the murmur of a man lost inside color. His name is Rembrandt van Rijn, a painter who didn't just paint faces, but souls. You probably wouldn't survive his kind of silence, the kind that stares back at you through centuries and still knows exactly who you are. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Leiden, a small Dutch town stitched together by canals, fog, and the faint echo of church bells. It's 1606. The air hums with the damp chill of Northern Europe. The kind that seeps through your bones and makes the world feel older than it is. Somewhere on a cobbled street, a young boy crouches by a window, drawing the way light falls across his mother's face as she reads the Psalms. That boy is Rembrandt van Rijn, the miller's son who can't stop staring at the way dust glows when it catches the sunday. He should be helping grind grain, but instead, he's mixing soot and oil into secret paints. You watch him tilt his head, studying how light curves around her cheek like a whisper from God. He doesn't know it yet, but this obsession will consume him. Light and shadow will become the language through which he speaks to eternity. Historians still argue whether his parents encouraged or merely tolerated his artistic curiosity. Some say his mother believed talent was divine, that to deny it would be sin. Others claim his father worried it was a distraction from the family business. What's certain is that Rembrandt was sent to the Latin school, meant for scholars, not artists. He learned scripture, Latin, philosophy, and yet none of it held him the way light did. He sketches everywhere, on scraps, in margins, on the back of his schoolwork. He studies faces old men, market women, beggars people most painters would ignore. You see the beginnings of something rare, not just skill, but empathy. He doesn't draw to impress. He draws to understand. One day, while skipping lessons, because of course he does, he wanders into a church just as the afternoon sun spills through the stained glass. The colored light hits the stone floor like a kaleidoscope. It's a small miracle, a sermon in color. He just stands there, mouth slightly open, realizing that light isn't just something you see, it's something you feel. That night, he tries to paint it. His mother scolds him for wasting oil, but he doesn't care. The candle flickers, the paint clumps, the shadow eats half his face. And somehow, that's the first real Rembrandt painting uneven, stubborn, alive. You can almost hear him thinking, light isn't beautiful because it reveals things. It's beautiful because it disappears trying. Decades later, when people would call him the painter of light, few would realize how literal that title was. Light was his teacher, his god, and his undoing. Even as a boy, he felt its paradox. That illumination only exists because of darkness. There's a story, maybe myth, maybe truth, that one night, he climbed up the family mill to watch the moon rise over the Rhine. The air was cold enough to sting, The wind tugged at his hair, and as the moon lit the rippling water, he whispered to himself, "That's how God paints." Whether he actually said it or not, it feels right, doesn't it? Because even now, centuries later, when you stand before one of his portraits, you don't just see paint, you see presence. You feel the breath between the light and the dark, the trembling stillness of a moment caught forever. Some artists are born with technique, others with temperament, but Rembrandt, he was born with curiosity, that dangerous, holy kind that never lets you rest. And as the first candle burns low in his little Leiden home, you realize the boy has already chosen his path. Not fame, not comfort, not even happiness. He's chosen the pursuit of light. And light, as everyone learns eventually, always comes with shadows. The studio smells of turpentine, oil, and quiet ambition. You step inside, your shoes crunch over wooden floors dusted with powdered pigment. The air is thick, warm, and alive with the hum of creation. Somewhere in the corner, a teenage Rembrandt stands before a blank canvas, his eyes burning like he's staring into a mirror that hasn't decided what it will reveal yet. He's left Leiden for Amsterdam, where art and commerce mingle like smoke and prayer. He's apprenticed under Jacob van Swanenburg, a man who once painted hell so convincingly that local priests accused him of visiting it. Swanenburg teaches him the basics: anatomy, composition, and most importantly, how to make chaos look deliberate. Every shadow, the old man tells him, is just light that's trying to find its way home. You see Rembrandt absorb it all like a sponge, except for one problem. He can't stop breaking the rules. While other apprentices study elegant saints or polish still lifes, he sketches beggars, drunks, and children with dirty hands. His brush doesn't flatter, it confesses. The other students whisper that he paints like a madman, but his master just smiles. "Leave him," Swanenburg says. "He sees the world differently." And he does. When he paints, the faces seem to breathe. Even the unfinished ones, especially the unfinished ones, carry that strange human weight. Historians still argue whether his genius was technical or spiritual. But maybe it was neither. Maybe he just paid attention in the way most people never do. Later, he studies under Peter Lastman, one of Amsterdam's most respected painters. Lastman's studio is chaos in glorious color. Half-finished biblical epics stacked beside cups of stale beer and broken brushes. Here, Rembrandt learns storytelling, how to make a painting, not just show a moment, but become one. Lastman insists on clarity. The viewer must see who is hero, who is sinner. But Rembrandt hesitates. What if, he asks, they are the same person? It's an innocent question, the kind that makes his teacher pause. You can almost feel the tension between tradition and rebellion begin to simmer. During this period, he paints Tobit and Anna with the kid, a small, quiet work. But already you see his signature, candlelight curling across weary faces, the fragile dignity of ordinary people cast in divine radiance. He's 20, maybe 21, and already painting like a man who's seen too much of the world's sorrow. There's a fringe rumor, probably apocryphal, that he would sneak into morgues to study the faces of the dead, tracing how light turned flesh into wax. Some say it's how he learned to make skin look translucent, alive even when cold. Others dismiss it as gossip from jealous rivals. Either way, you can't unsee the evidence. Every Rembrandt face feels like it's one heartbeat away from speaking. But while his art grows luminous, his world remains humble. His clothes are threadbare, his meals simple. His neighbors whisper about the miller's son who paints by candlelight until dawn. He doesn't seem to care. You can't paint the sun, he tells a friend, unless you've lived in darkness. And yet, there's joy in him, the kind of joy that comes from creation itself. You see him laugh with other apprentices, teasing them as they pose, his jokes half serious, half sarcastic. One of them complains, "You make me look too honest." Rembrandt grins. "That's not my fault." By 23, he's opened his own small studio in Leiden. His first self-portraits appear not grand, not noble, but raw. He stares at himself like he's interrogating a stranger. One scholar once said, Rembrandt didn't paint what he looked like. He painted what it felt like to be him. You can't help but notice, every time he paints himself, he looks a little more human, a little more haunted. And maybe that's the point. He's already chasing something no one else can see. Historians still debate whether he returned to Leiden out of homesickness or stubborn pride. Maybe both. Maybe he simply wanted to prove he didn't need Amsterdam's glitter to shine. But whatever the reason, his reputation begins to spread. People whisper about the young man who paints light itself. And if you were standing beside him now watching, as he mixes lead, white, umber, and ochre until the palette looks like a sunset caught in mud, you'd feel it too. That quiet certainty, that greatness, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just glows. You'd want to tell him what's coming. The fame, the love, the loss, the ruin, but you don't. You just watch him lean closer to the canvas, candlelight trembling across his face, and realize this is a boy building a world out of shadows. And for now, that's enough. You walk into the small studio where daylight leaks through high, dust-covered windows, a soft, grayish light that seems born for melancholy. Rembrandt stands at the center, sleeves rolled up, a palette in one hand, and a brush that trembles not from weakness, but anticipation. Around him, faces stare from unfinished canvases. Old men with watery eyes, women caught mid-thought, children whose innocence already carries the weight of time. This is the moment he begins to discover himself, not as a student, not as a craftsman, but as a painter of souls. His portraits start to shimmer in ways no one can quite explain. They're not flattering, they're not fashionable, they're true, and truth in paint is terrifying. The merchants who commission him expect nobility. He gives them vulnerability. They expect perfection. He gives them life. He paints a banker whose eyes look tired from counting sins instead of coins. He paints a maid whose rough hands glow in the soft light, as if blessed. He paints his father, not as a proud miller, but as a man quietly waiting for his own silence. Historians still argue whether Rembrandt saw divinity in every face, or simply refused to lie about humanity. Either way, he's doing something radical, turning ordinary people into something sacred. One afternoon, while cleaning his brushes, he murmurs to a friend, "It's not the light that makes them beautiful. It's the darkness that lets them be seen." You smile hearing that, because that's exactly what his art feels like. Compassion wrapped in shadow. You watch him paint the stoning of Street Stephen, his first major biblical piece. But even here, you notice something strange. He's not interested in the saint or the spectacle. He's interested in the faces of the bystanders, the silent witnesses, the people doing nothing while history happens. That's what Rembrandt paints, the complicated space between guilt and mercy. And then there's the small, almost comical detail that makes him human. He keeps using his own face for biblical characters. King Saul, himself, the Apostle Paul, also himself. Some scholars think it's ego. Others think it's empathy, his way of saying, I am all of them. Maybe he just couldn't afford models. Either way, the result is haunting. Every biblical scene becomes a quiet self-portrait of his conscience. By now, his style is unmistakable. He's abandoned smooth finishes for thick, rough textures that catch the light like skin. His brushstrokes are wild, impulsive, like a musician improvising mid-song. Critics complain that his paintings look unfinished, but you sense he's not painting for them. He's painting for truth, and truth rarely looks polished. He experiments with layering, glazing thin light over thick darkness, creating an illusion that breathes. Painters would later call this chiaroscuro, but for Rembrandt, it isn't technique, it's theology. Every highlight becomes a moment of revelation. Every shadow, a confession. There's a lovely little myth, probably exaggerated, that he once kept a mirror beside every canvas, not for accuracy, but as a reminder, you are also made of shadow. You imagine him at night, alone, the candles burning low, his hand steady even when his heart isn't. He paints until dawn, chasing the exact color of candlelight on aging skin. Outside, the world sleeps. Inside, he's learning to see what most people never will, that every flicker of light contains the memory of its own darkness. Around this time, his self-portraits multiply. They're not acts of vanity, they're diary entries. In one, he looks defiant. In another, exhausted. In the next, amused, almost mocking himself. He's studying his own mortality the way others study anatomy. You can feel him thinking, if I can understand my own face, maybe I can understand God's. Historians still debate the order of these works, which came first, which came after, as if it matters. But standing here, watching them line the walls like silent confessions, you realize they form something bigger than a sequence. They're a conversation between a man and his reflection, between the living and the light. And through it all, he laughs. That's what most people forget about Rembrandt. He wasn't solemn all the time. He had a wicked sense of humor. He paints himself squinting like a fool, wearing ridiculous hats, even pretending to be drunk. You can almost hear him chuckle. If I must stare at myself for eternity, I might as well enjoy the company. Still, underneath the laughter, you sense the storm brewing, the loneliness that comes when art becomes your only companion. Because behind every brushstroke is a quiet question. Who will see me the way I see them? That question will soon be answered beautifully, tragically, inevitably. But for now, he paints, lost in his own light. And if you lean close enough to the canvas, you can almost hear the whisper. The face is not what we show the world. It's what light forgives. The scent of fresh linen fills the air, faint, soft, and human. You're in Amsterdam now, in the heart of the Dutch Golden Age. Ships creak in the harbor, coins jingle in taverns, and the whole city hums like a marketplace of dreams. somewhere among all that noise and gold, Rembrandt meets her. Her name is Saskia van Eulenburg. You'll hear her name whispered through every painting he'll ever love again. She's the cousin of an art dealer, clever, radiant, and laughing in a way that makes even the candlelight hesitate. When she enters a room, it's as if Rembrandt's world, all shadow and solitude, suddenly remembers what warmth feels like. He sketches her constantly, first shyly, then obsessively. Sometimes she's an angel, sometimes a noblewoman, sometimes just Saskia barefoot, smiling, her hair undone. He doesn't paint her as a muse, he paints her as a mirror. Through her, he begins to see the beauty he's been chasing wasn't divine at all. It was human. Historians still argue whether it was love at first sight, or love that grew in the quiet between sketches. But it hardly matters. When he paints her, time slows. You can almost feel his pulse in the brushstrokes. The tenderness, the awe, the fear, it's all there, layered between the paint and the silence. They marry in 1634. He's 28. She's 22. The city celebrates. And suddenly, the miller's son from Leiden becomes the darling of Amsterdam. Commissions pour in. Wealthy merchants want their portraits done by the man who paints souls. Rembrandt buys a grand house on Jodenbriestraat, complete with high ceilings, huge windows, and a studio so flooded with light it could blind you. It's ironic, isn't it? The man obsessed with shadows now lives in sunlight, but you can tell he's uncomfortable with it. He paints Saskia, surrounded by gold jewelry and exotic fabrics, yet there's always a glimmer of sadness in her eyes, as if she already knows how fragile their happiness is. There's a small, charming story, maybe true, maybe just legend, about how he would wake her in the middle of the night to capture the way moonlight fell across her cheek. "Sleep later," he'd whisper. "The light won't wait." She'd laugh, roll her eyes, and pose anyway. That's love, isn't it? Not the grand gestures, but the quiet moments when two people agree to chase a fleeting glow together. Their life is full of contradictions, luxury and longing, success and sickness. Saskia suffers through miscarriages. Only one of their children, Titus, survives infancy. You sense how every brushstroke of joy carries a tremor of loss beneath it. In the Jewish bride, in the Saskia portraits, even in the prodigal son, her face reappears again and again, sometimes as a memory, sometimes as a ghost. He paints her wearing pearls and silk, yet somehow you feel she's always just beyond his reach. He's not painting a woman, he's painting the impossibility of holding on to light. As his fame grows, so does his arrogance. He spends too freely, collects antiques, exotic costumes, even taxidermied animals props for his paintings, excuses for extravagance. His house becomes a museum of madness. Armor beside skulls, feathers beside scrolls, chaos made sacred. You'd love to wander those rooms. They probably smelled of dust, oil, and quiet genius. But you'd also feel the tension. Rembrandt is climbing, and the higher he goes, the steeper the fall becomes. He paints Saskia as Flora, goddess of spring, a crown of flowers in her hair, a soft smile that could stop time. You can see his heart in the paint, the way her skin glows as if lit from within. But you also know what's coming. The world rarely allows light to last. Saskia grows ill tuberculosis, most historians believe. The The laughter fades. The bed becomes her kingdom. He keeps painting her anyway, even as her body weakens. In one of the final portraits, she's seated, eyes half closed, almost translucent. You can see his desperation in the softness of her outline. He's not recording her likeness anymore. He's trying to keep her alive through pigment. One fringe theory suggests he mixed her ashes into his later paints, not out of madness, but devotion. There's no proof, of course, but the idea lingers because it feels true. He was a man who believed light could resurrect anything. When she finally dies in 1642, at just 30 years old, something in him breaks. The sunlight in his studio feels colder now. The laughter in his brushstrokes fades. He buries her with more tenderness than he'll ever show another human being. And when he picks up his brush again, you notice it immediately, the change. The light he paints now doesn't dance. It mourns. It seeps in from corners, hesitating, fragile. It's not the kind of light that celebrates life. It's the kind that asks why we lose it. Saskia leaves him her fortune, but money can't fill the space her silence leaves behind. He once painted to capture beauty. Now, he paints to remember it. And as you watch him working late into the night, his candle almost burned out, you realize this is where genius turns into grief, where art becomes the only way left to say, I miss you. Morning breaks over Amsterdam like honey spilling through clouds, soft, golden, unhurried. The canals glitter, the bells ring, and somewhere above it all, inside that tall, windowed house on Jodenbriestraat, Rembrandt begins to paint the world differently. He's no longer the miller's son, no longer the curious apprentice. Now he's Rembrandt, the golden boy of the Dutch Republic, the artist whose portraits seem to breathe. He's wealthy, admired, a living legend before his beard has even gone gray. You watch him step into his studio, surrounded by canvases stacked like half-finished dreams. The floor is stained with paint and candle wax. The air hums with creative chaos. Assistants scurry, grinding pigments, stretching linen, adjusting models. And there, at the center of it all, he stands the calm within the storm, studying light the way a priest studies scripture. Every stroke now feels deliberate, godlike. He paints merchants, magistrates, ship captains, the powerful faces of a booming empire. They come dressed in velvet and lace, expecting flattery. But Rembrandt gives them honesty instead. Their eyes look tired, their hands too human, too much truth, one patron complains. Too little beauty. He doesn't care. Beauty, he says quietly, is the kindness of light. And yet, irony dances just behind him because fame is its own kind of shadow. Every success feeds his pride. Every commission fuels his recklessness. He buys more antiques, more jewels, more props objects that glitter but can't fill the silence Saskia left. His home begins to look like a museum of ghosts. Historians still argue whether his extravagance was arrogance or escapism. But you can feel it, that gnawing emptiness. The more light he gathers, the more he's haunted by what it can't illuminate. He paints the Night Watch, though the title, like most good legends, is wrong. It wasn't night at all, but daylight darkened by age and varnish. The painting bursts with movement, soldiers mid-step, banners unfurled, faces alive with energy. It's chaos captured in amber, a symphony of light and motion. When you look at it, you realize something revolutionary has happened. This isn't just a portrait, it's a story. Each figure is alive, frozen between breaths. No painter has ever dared something like this before, to make stillness look like motion, to make order feel like life. But genius rarely goes unpunished. His patrons are furious. They wanted stiff, ceremonial likenesses, not this riot of humanity. They claimed he disrespected them, made them look disorderly. You can almost hear him sigh. I painted truth, and truth was not flattering. The painting that should have secured his immortality becomes the spark of his downfall. Commissions begin to dry up. Wealthy clients whisper he's difficult. The city that once adored him begins to look the other way. Still, he paints. He can't stop. His brush becomes confession, defiance, therapy. The more they look away, he mutters, the brighter I'll paint. There's a strange, endearing habit he develops during this time, talking to his paintings. You'll outlive me, he tells them. Be kind to whoever stares at you next. You imagine the echoes in that studio voices murmuring between portraits, ghosts learning to forgive their maker. He paints the company of Captain Banning Cock, the so-called Night Watch, with layers so thick you could trace them like veins. He mixes sand into the paint for texture, as if to remind himself that art should feel as much as it looks. Some scholars claim he hid self-portraits in the crowd, disguised faces peeking through the militia, his own quiet rebellion saying, I am always watching you. And then there's his light. Oh, that impossible light. It spills like divine permission, illuminating some faces, abandoning others. It doesn't follow logic, it follows emotion. Art historians still can't fully explain how he did it. But you, standing here centuries later, feel it, the pulse, the warmth, the grief beneath the glow. Even as his fame fades, Rembrandt's conviction deepens. He tells his students, painting is not about what you see, it's about what you let others feel. One of those students writes in his diary that the master's hands moved like prayers. Another recalls him laughing at his own mistakes, saying, the paint knows better than I do. That's humility disguised as genius. Yet, beneath the laughter, there's loneliness. He eats alone, paints alone, mourns alone. The city moves on new fashions, new faces, brighter colors, smoother styles. He refuses to adapt. Let them paint lace, he scoffs. I'll paint light. You can't help but admire him stubborn, flawed, glorious. The kind of man who'd rather lose the world than lie to it. And so, night after night, the candles burn low in his studio. The streets outside fall silent. And there he stands, brush in hand, surrounded by the only company that never betrayed him, his paintings. You look around, dozens of faces staring back, each lit from within, each whispering something wordless, and you understand why he keeps going. He's not painting the rich anymore. He's painting himself in fragments, in strangers, in shadows. It's beautiful. It's tragic. It's utterly human. And it's only the beginning of his fall. The streets of Amsterdam grow quieter now. The same city that once rang with laughter, haggling, and carriages has taken on the stillness of dusk. You walk beside Rembrandt as he steps through the market square, his coat pulled tight, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. He's not the darling of the Golden Age anymore. He's become something rarer, an artist stripped bare of glory, painting not to impress, but to endure. His fame may be fading, but his vision is deepening. The light that once dazzled him now softens into something more merciful, more human. You see it in his subjects. Beggars, widows, the blind. People no one else would paint. People no one else would even see. He invites them into his studio, offering them bread, wine, and a coin for posing. They sit awkwardly, unsure why this famous man wants to immortalize them. He studies their faces like sacred texts, every wrinkle a verse, every scar a sermon. His brush moves slowly, reverently, and in the flicker of the oil lamp, the poor become prophets. In the syndics of the Drapers Guild, he paints merchants checking cloth, their hands mid-motion. Nothing grand, no divine scene, just men at work. Yet somehow, it feels biblical. Light spills across their faces with such quiet purpose. It's as if God himself has stepped in to take inventory. Historians still argue whether Rembrandt meant to elevate the ordinary or simply accepted its holiness. But maybe he didn't need to decide. To him, painting wasn't about judgment, it was about witnessing. There's a lovely, forgotten detail buried in one of his sketches, a note scribbled beside a beggar's face. He smiled when the light touched his eyes. It's such a small thing, almost invisible, yet it tells you everything about who Rembrandt was. He paints old women praying, children clutching crusts of bread, a blind man touching a coin he cannot see, and through them all, he paints empathy, the kind of empathy that comes only from loss. Because by now, Saskia is gone. His fame is waning. His friends are drifting away. He's learning what it means to love people who will never love you back. And still he paints. His palette grows darker, heavier. The colors thicken, as if he's painting not with light, but through it. He experiments with layering warm and cold tones, blending shadow and glow until they seem to breathe against one another. It's no longer technique, it's alchemy. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, that he once said to a student, "If you cannot find light in the world, paint until it finds you." You don't know if he ever said it, but you can see that philosophy in every brush stroke. When you stand before the 100 Guilder print, you can feel it a quiet sermon on grace and suffering. Christ stands among the poor, the weary, the unwanted faces Rembrandt knew too well. He doesn't paint them as sinners or saints, just as souls. No halos, no hierarchies, just light, reaching where the world does not. His contemporaries start calling his style too heavy, too old-fashioned. The art world moves towards smooth polish and moral prettiness. But Rembrandt, he refuses. He keeps painting the unglamorous, the imperfect, the human. You can almost hear his defiance. Let them chase gold. I'll chase light. And that's what he does. Even when his creditors knock. Even when his students leave. Even when his house feels too big for one man's grief. Historians debate whether he ever truly believed in religion, but his art makes the question irrelevant. He believed in human divinity. That was his faith. That was his church. In one late sketch, he draws a beggar woman holding a child. It's quick, rough, incomplete, but her face glows. Not because of the lamp, but because she exists. That's the miracle, to make a stranger eternal with a few strokes of pigment. and if you look close enough past the centuries, past the varnish, you'll see it. The same light that once fell on Saskia's cheek, now resting on the forgotten. The painter who once captured beauty, now redeems it. And as the candle burns low beside him, you realize Rembrandt's art isn't about escaping darkness anymore. It's about teaching it how to shine. The candle flickers, the paintbrush trembles. The house that once echoed with laughter and love now hums with quiet sorrow. You can feel it the moment you step inside. A kind of stillness that smells like dust, oil, and absence. Saskia's gone, but she hasn't really left. Her portraits watch him from the walls, soft faces painted in happier hours. Her memory lingers in every object, her hairpin on the dresser, her shawl folded in a corner, her perfume faint in the wood grain. You can almost hear him whisper to the silence, "Stay a little longer." But time, as always, keeps moving. And Rembrandt, that stubborn miller's son who once painted light like a sermon, now paints it like a prayer. He starts painting differently. The brightness of youth is gone. What remains is depth, weight, gravity. Light no longer floods the scene. It breaks through cracks. It's the kind of light you earn, not the kind you find. He paints the return of the prodigal son. You stand beside him, watching his brush move with unsteady tenderness. The father's hands rest on the son's back. Not symmetrical, not perfect one hand weathered, the other soft. Art historians still debate whether that was intentional or symbolic. Some say it represents mercy and justice. Others, divine love and human fragility. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe it's just Rembrandt, remembering what it feels like to hold someone for the last time. He's grieving, yes, but not passively. His grief becomes creation, each painting a conversation with loss. He paints Saskia again and again, disguised as saints, mothers, muses. Every new figure glows with that same familiar gentleness, as if he's trying to paint her spirit back into the world. And yet, life keeps testing him. His finances crumble. The lavish lifestyle he once flaunted becomes a burden. The creditors grow louder. You hear their knocks at the door, their voices echoing through his empty hallways. They come not for his soul, but for his furniture, his collections, his memories. There's a note in a 1,650 seconds record, Rembrandt's possessions auctioned off piece by piece. Turkish carpets, ancient busts, a collection of shells, Saskia's jewels, even his own paintings. You imagine him standing there, watching strangers haggle over fragments of his life. He doesn't plead. He doesn't rage. He just paints. One of his few remaining students later recalled how, even in despair, the master joked. "They'll sell the sunlight next," he quipped, "but I'll find a way to paint it before they do." That's the paradox of him. The humor clinging to heartbreak. The defiance that refuses to die. He's losing everything, but somehow gaining clarity. His later works aren't polished. They're raw, wounded, alive. The paint grows thicker, the colors deeper. His brushstrokes turn into whispers of emotion. And yet, in those dark years, he produces some of his greatest work. Bathsheba at her bath, you can feel the quiet tragedy in her eyes, her vulnerability, her impossible beauty. Art historians argue endlessly. Is it a moral painting, a biblical allegory, or simply a love letter to loss? The answer is yes to all of it, because that's Rembrandt. Every painting is both confession and contradiction. There's a lesser-known portrait from this period. An old woman reading, her face illuminated by candlelight. It's not grand. It's not meant for sale. But when you see it, something inside you softens. That gentle light on her wrinkled skin, it's not romantic or divine. It's forgiveness. Rembrandt is forgiving the world and himself through paint. Sometimes, while working, he mutters Saskia's name. Other times, he talks to God not in prayer, but in argument. If you're going to take everything, he says one night, leave me the light. And somehow, he does. You realize what makes him immortal isn't skill or fame. It's resilience, the refusal to let sorrow silence wonder. Because while others paint to be remembered, Rembrandt paints to remember to keep love alive in color and shadow, even when it's gone from life. And in that dim Amsterdam studio, surrounded by debt, dust, and ghosts, he paints his masterpiece, not with his hands, but with his endurance. The room smells faintly of varnish and debt. You can hear the faint creak of floorboards as Rembrandt moves across his studio, slower now, heavier, but still defiant. The once golden boy of Amsterdam has become its ghost. The creditors have stripped him of everything except the one thing they can't auction, his truth. It's 1642. The same year Saskia dies, he finishes The Night Watch. The timing feels cruel, almost cosmic, the birth of his masterpiece, the death of his muse. Two collisions of light and shadow that will define him forever. You stand beside him as he unveils it. This sprawling, chaotic, thunderous painting. Soldiers frozen mid-motion. A captain's hand caught in sunlight. Drums, banners, a little girl glowing like a flame in the dark. It's not portraiture anymore. It's theater. It's life captured mid-breath. And yet, the patrons hate it. Too crowded, they say. Too dark. They wanted symmetry, not honesty. They paid for flattery, not truth. Historians still argue what stung worse, their rejection, or the realization that they couldn't see what he saw. He shrugs it off in public. Privately, it wounds him. He stops attending guild meetings, avoids social gatherings, and buries himself in work. The city moves on, but he keeps painting the way he always has, as if salvation depends on it. The anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tope had made him famous a decade earlier. That chilling display of science and mortality, doctors crowding around a cadaver. People praised its realism, not realizing the quiet message inside. Even in death, light seeks understanding. Now, years later, the Night Watch feels like its opposite, not science, but chaos. Not death, but defiance. It's the sound of a man saying, the world is too alive for perfection. And it costs him everything. Commissions dry up. His name becomes whispered, not celebrated. Students leave for newer, shinier masters. He takes smaller jobs, paints fewer patrons, and instead turns to faces that no one else cares for: the poor, the mad, the condemned. They sit in silence while he paints, and he finds in them something holy. One afternoon, while painting a beggar, he murmurs, "You don't need gold to be worthy of light." The beggar laughs a toothless grin that somehow makes the room brighter. That's when you realize Rembrandt isn't losing his vision. He's refining it. The less the world gives him, the more he sees. There's a theory, poetic but persistent, that he began hiding allegories of himself inside the Night Watch. Look closely, scholars say, and you'll find him in the shadows near the back, barely visible, holding a brush instead of a musket, watching, unseen. It's the most Rembrandt thing imaginable, to paint himself into the darkness while letting others stand in the light. He paints the Jewish bride, a work so intimate that even now it feels like an invasion to look at it. Two figures, joined by tenderness that words can't name. The texture is thick, sculptural, you could almost touch the emotion. Vincent van Gogh would later stand before it and whisper, "I would give 10 years of my life to sit here for 2 weeks with only a crust of bread." Rembrandt, of course, never heard that praise. He was already being forgotten. His friends were dying. His money was gone. His reputation flickered like a candle in wind. But the art burned brighter. Every brushstroke now feels like survival raw, reckless, unrepentant. He starts signing his paintings simply Rembrandt, dropping his last name entirely. Not out of pride, but clarity. He no longer belongs to lineage or society, only to himself and to light. Historians still debate whether he understood his genius. Some think he died bitter. Others believe he knew exactly what he was doing, building eternity one shadow at a time. You can almost see him standing before the night watch years later, older now, squinting through failing eyes and whispering to himself, they didn't understand. But the light did, and the light, still flickering across the cracked paint, whispers back, "I never left you." The studio is quiet now, the kind of quiet that hums, that feels alive, like the pause before confession. The air is heavy with the smell of turpentine and loneliness. Shadows stretch long across the floorboards, creeping over old canvases stacked against the wall like abandoned memories. You watch as Rembrandt sits alone at his easel. The same man who once painted kings and captains now paints creditors and chaos. His fortune is gone, his house sold, his pride tested beyond measure. He's living in a rented room, his possessions inventoried by strangers, his name whispered in pity more than praise. But there's something strange about him. He doesn't look broken. He looks awake. His hands are rough now, his eyesight dimmer, but his brush still moves like a prayer. He paints not for approval, not for money, but for something far more dangerous: redemption. There's a record from 1656, Rembrandt van Rijn declared bankrupt. His debts are immense. His paintings, once priceless, are now appraised like furniture. The same men who once begged for his portraits now haggle over his belongings. Even his beloved studio on Jodenbrestraat, once filled with light, is auctioned off piece by piece. He watches, expressionless, as buyers carry away his props, his antique busts, his armor, his exotic costumes, even Saskia's pearls. A neighbor recalls seeing him smile faintly, muttering, "Let them have the shells. I've already painted the ocean." You can't tell if it's irony or peace, maybe both. Historians still argue whether his downfall was caused by pride, poor finances, or bad luck. But standing here, in this half-empty room, you sense the truth. His tragedy wasn't financial, it was spiritual. The world could no longer afford the kind of honesty he painted. And so, Rembrandt becomes an exile within his own city, walking streets, lined with faces he once immortalized, now turning away. But he keeps painting them in secret, from memory, from instinct. His canvases become darker, heavier, more inward. He paints the conspiracy of Claudius Civilis, his only large-scale commission after years of silence. The story of a rebel who defies an empire. You don't need to squint hard to see what he's doing. The painting is a mirror Rembrandt, as the defiant old man, eyes lit with the last spark of rebellion. But the city council hates it. They call it too rough, too raw, too emotional. It's removed from display after just a few weeks. Some say he took it home and cut it apart in despair. Others say he laughed and poured himself a drink. Because by now, he's past anger. He knows that art and acceptance rarely share the same room. There's a strange peace in his decline. His studio shrinks to a single table, a single lamp, a few brushes worn to nubs. His meals are meager, his debts endless. But when he paints, everything else disappears. You can almost feel the rhythm of it, the scrape of the palette knife, the sigh between strokes, the candle guttering beside him. He paints Christ at Emmaus, the Polish rider, a woman bathing in a stream. They're quiet works, small, but each one feels infinite, as if he's discovered that the less you have, the closer you get to truth. One of his students, Samuel van Hoogstraten, later wrote that Rembrandt did not paint to please the eye, but to touch the soul. You can't improve on that. There's a tenderness in his late work that no success could have taught him. Every face is lit from within, not from above. The light isn't divine anymore, it's human. The candle burns smaller, but warmer. Sometimes, while painting late at night, he talks aloud not to God, not to Saskia, but to the light itself. "You've been patient," he says softly. "I'm almost ready." You watch him wipe his hands, stare at the canvas, and laugh a small, cracked sound that feels like both surrender and victory. Because here's the truth. Art has given him what life could not permanence. And even as the city forgets him, even as his name fades from fashionable lips, his light doesn't die. It just grows quieter, deeper, closer to the bone. You realize then that genius isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a man painting alone in a dim room, surrounded by debt, talking to ghosts and meaning every word. The door creaks open, and for the first time in years, there's laughter again, hesitant, quiet, the kind that sounds like something fragile, remembering how to exist. Her name is Hendrickje Stoffels. She's younger, bright-eyed, the daughter of a soldier, and she comes to Rembrandt's house as a servant, though she'll never really be one. At first, she tidies his chaos, wiping brushes, sweeping the dust, folding linens around canvases that still smell like Saskia. But soon, something shifts. He starts painting her. At first as a study, then as something more. Her presence softens him. The house feels less like a tomb, more like a home. You can see it in his work. The shadows lift slightly. The warmth returns. He paints Hendrickje not as an ideal, but as herself. Her face half in light, half in shadow. Every flaw turned into tenderness. In a woman bathing in a stream, she kneels barefoot in water. Her expression simple, human, alive. It's one of his most intimate works. Quiet, unguarded, true. Historians still argue whether Hendrickje saved him or merely steadied him for a while. Some call her his second muse, others his last lifeline. But you, standing here, watching how the light rests on her in his paintings, know this much. She became the silence he could finally breathe in. Their relationship, though, isn't welcomed by the world. The church condemns them for living together unmarried. She's summoned before the elders and publicly shamed. Rembrandt says nothing during the hearing, only squeezes her hand afterward and murmurs, "They've never seen light like I have." You imagine that night, the rain against the windows, the soft hiss of the candle as he paints her again, the sound of two exiles refusing to repent for love. Their daughter, Cornelia, is born soon after. For a brief, flickering moment, life feels full again. He paints her tiny hands, the glow on Hendricky's face. Even in poverty, he finds light, not the dramatic blaze of his youth, but the soft warmth of family. But fate, as always, is impatient. Hendrik G. grows ill, perhaps tuberculosis, perhaps exhaustion. The same slow thief that took Saskia now returns for her. You can see it in Hendrik G. at her window, her eyes distant, her skin almost translucent. He paints her gently, reverently, as if trying to delay the inevitable. When she dies, around 1,663, he doesn't hold a funeral. He paints instead. His brush moves like prayer beads, steady, rhythmic, grieving. He paints the Jewish bride soon after a man and woman standing together. Not young, not perfect, but eternally tender. Historians debate who they are. Some say biblical lovers. Some say pure imagination. But you know the truth. It's him and Hendrik G. love surviving, even when life doesn't. By now, the city barely remembers him, but he's still here, painting, mourning, surviving. The man who once painted kings now paints memories. He begins to paint himself again. Not the proud self-portraits of youth, but raw, unguarded studies, wrinkles, sagging skin, eyes that have seen too much. They're not vanity, they're honesty. "I've been everyone I've painted," he mutters once. "And now, I'm just me." And somehow, those portraits glow. The light doesn't come from outside anymore. It comes from within, dim, but undefeated. He keeps Hendrik's shawl beside his easel for years after. Sometimes, he drapes it over his shoulders while he paints, as if to borrow her warmth. One visitor later wrote, "Rembrandt's house smelled of oil and ghosts, yet his eyes were brighter than ever. You stand beside him now, in this small, fading studio." He dips his brush, studies the light falling through the dusty window, and says quietly, "You have to understand darkness to make light mean something." And for a moment, you think maybe he's not talking about painting anymore. The walls of the studio seem to breathe. Candlelight dances faintly against wooden beams, turning everything golden for a moment. It's as if time pauses just to watch him work. His hands are older now, his grip slower, but each movement carries something you can't quite name. Not perfection, not pride, but something deeper, something like faith. Rembrandt is painting again, but this time the world doesn't see what he's doing. The commissions are gone, the critics have vanished. No one comes to pose anymore. And yet, day after day, he rises, grinds pigment, and lets his brush wander toward redemption. This is the era of his confession. Every painting now feels like an act of honesty, a quiet reckoning between himself and existence. The lines are looser, the layers thicker. His figures don't just stand in light, they become it. Their eyes meet yours, heavy with decades of seeing and forgiving. He paints the return of the prodigal son again, but softer this time, No grandeur, no performance. Just light, falling like mercy. It's not a biblical story anymore. It's a mirror. You realize he's painting himself, the lost son who's wandered through pride, fame, loss, and loneliness, returning home not to a father, but to truth. Historians still argue whether Rembrandt ever repented for his arrogance or excess. But when you look at his late portraits, repentance seems too small a word. What you see is understanding. He's no longer fighting the dark. He's listening to it. One evening, a neighbor visits and finds him studying his own reflection by candlelight, sketching the hollows under his eyes. "You look tired," the neighbor says. Rembrandt smiles faintly. "I'm learning to paint from the inside out." And that's exactly what he does. He no longer paints what light touches. He paints what light feels like. The technique is breathtaking. He begins blending pigments with his thumb instead of his brush, smudging and pressing until texture itself becomes emotion. He uses gold and ash, honey and mud, until his subjects look carved from the same substance as memory. In self-portrait, with 2 circles, his gaze meets yours calm, almost amused. Behind him, 2 perfect circles float, unfinished. Scholars have argued for centuries what they mean. Eternity? Perfection. His signature challenge to God? No one knows. But when you stare long enough, they feel like halos, the kind an old man paints for himself only after he stopped believing he deserves one. There's a detail most people miss. His clothes. They're plain, almost poor, a far cry from the ornate costumes of his youth. Even his palette looks stripped of vanity ochres, umbers, raw sienna, earth tones, humble, human. You realize something miraculous. He's painting not the world he sees, but the world he's accepted. His light has changed. It's no longer a spotlight. It's a candle in the dark. A whisper, not a sermon. You feel it in the Jewish bride, in the syndics, in the final self-portraits. This tenderness that defies despair. A humility that says, "I've lost everything, and yet I still love the light." One of his last pupils once described watching him paint and said, "It was like seeing a man pray with color." He no longer rushes. Every stroke seems to ask a question, then answer it gently. You hear him mutter, "Let it breathe," as he steps back from the canvas. You imagine him teaching the paint to rest, to glow from within rather than blaze from without. And as he works, you realize something quietly profound, that perhaps Rembrandt never painted light at all. Perhaps he painted the hope of it, the belief that even in the deepest sorrow, something still shines. There's a story, one of those half-truths history loves, that in his final years, he would talk to his candle before blowing it out each night. "You did well," he'd say softly. "Thank you for staying." You want to believe that's true, because it's exactly how his paintings feel, as if every one of them is a thank you to the light for not abandoning him. When you look at those final portraits, weary eyes, trembling hands, the faint glimmer in the gloom, you realize he's not painting to escape the dark anymore. He's painting to forgive it. And in that forgiveness, he finds something no fame, no wealth, no applause ever gave him: peace. The candles have burned lower now. The smell of oil and age fills the room, that quiet perfume of someone who's lived too long among ghosts. You step closer to Rembrandt, as he sits hunched over a smaller easel than before, his brush steady, though his hands have grown frail. The light on his face is soft, and for a moment, you realize something astonishing. He's no longer painting light onto people, he's painting it out of them. There's someone new in the house, his son Titus. The child Saskia left him, now grown into a gentle, thoughtful man. Titus is the last piece of Rembrandt's heart still alive, the only reminder of laughter, of family, of mornings that once began with hope instead of hunger. You watch them together in the fading glow, the father painting, the son handling his sails, arranging what few commissions still trickle in. Their conversations are quiet, easy. They share the same kind of silence that exists between people who have already forgiven each other for everything. Rembrandt paints Titus often, not as a symbol, not as pride, but as love. You can see it in Portrait of Titus. In a monk's habit, the boy's eyes solemn, inward, carrying the gravity of a man twice his age. Some scholars think Rembrandt dressed him as a monk to represent humility, but it feels more personal than that. It feels like he's painting his son as the one thing he's never managed to be, at peace. Historians still argue about Titus's life, whether he truly wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, or if he longed for an easier existence. There are few records, few letters, but one thing is certain: he loved his father fiercely. Even after bankruptcy, even after public shame, Titus stayed. He arranged deals to protect Rembrandt's art from creditors, often buying it himself under false names, just to keep it safe. You can imagine him saying, "Let me carry some of it now, father," and the old man just nodding, pretending not to cry. But time, as always, demands its toll. Titus falls ill. Maybe the same sickness that took his mother. Maybe just exhaustion from trying to hold up a man the world has already buried. When he dies in 1668 at the age of 26, something in Rembrandt collapses completely. You feel it like a shift in air, the last ember of warmth snuffed out. After that, his paintings change once more. They become quieter, slower, almost whisper-like. The paint grows thicker, the colors heavier. You can sense him painting memory itself, as if every brushstroke is a way of saying, "I remember you. Don't fade yet." He paints the return of the prodigal son one final time, this time larger, darker, more aching than before. The father's hands, those same mismatched hands you noticed earlier, rest once again on the son's back. But now, you see what they mean. One hand is mercy, the other is mourning. People still debate whether he finished it before or after Titus's death, but it doesn't matter. The painting is both a goodbye and a prayer. The son kneeling isn't a biblical figure anymore. It's Rembrandt himself, old, humbled, forgiven. There's a story from one of his last visitors, a student who found him asleep in his chair, a wet brush still in his hand. The painting on the easel showed a faint candle, barely lit, surrounded by darkness. "Master," the student whispered, "should I put it out?" And without opening his eyes, Rembrandt murmured, "No, it's still breathing." That's how his art feels now, breathing. Even when the man who made it is fading. His house is small, almost bare. His meals are simple bread, a bit of cheese, sometimes fish if he can afford it. Yet his workbench still glows with quiet reverence. You notice he keeps a small sketch of Saskia beside his paints, edges yellowed with age. Sometimes he glances at it before he begins a ritual, a reminder. When he paints self-portraits in these years, they no longer look like vanity or defiance. They look like surrender. His face sags, his gaze is direct, stripped of all performance. He's not looking at you, he's looking through you. Straight into the centuries, into whoever dares to meet his eyes and ask, "Did it matter?" And in that look, you hear his answer, "Yes, because I saw you, because I saw everything." There's no grandeur left, no wealth, no fame, just truth, and the faintest shimmer of grace that refuses to die. You realize now that every portrait he ever painted, Saskia, Hendricky, Titus, the beggars, the saints, they were all pieces of himself, scattered across time, trying to find their way back home. And as he lowers his brush one last time for the night, his face lit by a trembling candle, you understand that his art was never about escaping the dark. It was about proving that light, no matter how fragile, always finds its way home. The autumn air outside is thin and sharp, the kind that makes the city's canals look like mirrors for ghosts. Inside, Rembrandt's studio glows dimly, the familiar circle of candlelight surrounding him, like a fragile halo. He's 70 now. The man who once painted faces for the powerful is painting only one face these days, his own. You step closer. The canvas shows a weathered man, staring back, cheeks sagging, eyes weary, but still alive with that unmistakable fire. The paint is thick, almost sculpted. He no longer paints smooth lines. He builds them, layer upon layer, truth upon truth, until the face feels less like an image and more like the residue of a life lived honestly. This is self-portrait at the age of 63. His last one. There's no vanity in it, no costume or performance. Just Rembrandt old, poor, unshaven, unflinching. His eyes meet yours with that haunting steadiness that feels both intimate and infinite. He looks tired, yes, but not defeated. There's still humor there. A tiny spark of irony in the corner of his mouth, as if he's saying, "Well, you're still looking at me, aren't you?" Historians still argue what this final portrait means. Some call it resignation, others redemption. Some see faith, others despair. But standing here, watching the trembling brushwork, you realize it's simpler than that. It's peace. He's finally stopped fighting the shadows. His eyesight has weakened, but his sense of light has never been sharper. He knows exactly where to let it fall on his cheek, across his eyes, around his mouth. Just enough to remind you he's still here, still breathing, still seeing. And what a gaze that is. It isn't the gaze of a man asking to be remembered. It's the gaze of a man who has already forgiven you for forgetting him. One of his apprentices once wrote, "When he painted himself, he looked as though he were listening. You can almost hear it too, the faint hum of silence, the slow rhythm of his breath, the soft flicker of the candle that has witnessed more truth than any sermon." He paints for hours, then stops, just looks. Sometimes he laughs softly. Sometimes he says nothing at all. The walls around him are bare now, sold, pawned, gone. But the space doesn't feel empty. It feels full of everything that ever mattered. Color, memory, faith, loss. He paints another small portrait that no one commissions a study of hands, gnarled and veined, folded gently in his lap. maybe his own, maybe Titus's, maybe every hand he's ever loved. He spends days on it, returning each morning, adding just a little more warmth, a little more forgiveness. There's an apocryphal story that, near the end, a neighbor's child would visit to bring him bread and sit quietly in the corner while he worked. One day, the boy asked, "Why do you always paint yourself?" Rembrandt smiled, dipping his brush into the paint. "Because I keep changing," he said. That answer, soft, weary, magnificent, tells you everything. He's not painting to immortalize himself. He's painting to make peace with himself. To understand how light changes, how time softens even the harshest outlines. In those last months, you can feel him slowing not just his body, but his spirit, as though he's finally ready to lay down the brush. And yet, he doesn't stop. He can't. Each painting feels like a farewell letter written in color. When you look at that final self-portrait again, that quiet face in its circle of glow, you notice something extraordinary. He's no longer afraid of the dark. The background is nearly black, and yet he doesn't fight it. He lets it surround him, cradle him. The light on his face feels earned, because it is. Rembrandt, who spent his entire life chasing the light, has finally realized what it was trying to tell him all along, that you don't have to escape the darkness to find beauty. You just have to let the two coexist. You can almost hear him whisper it as he cleans his brush for the last time. There is no light without shadow, but also no shadow without light. The candle beside him flickers, then steadies, as if even the flame refuses to go out before he does. And somewhere in that dim little room, among the smell of oil and dust and old wood, a man who once painted the faces of the living has painted himself into eternity. It's quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels like a closing curtain. Outside, autumn rain taps softly against the glass, the canals blurring into streaks of silver. Inside, the old man sleeps in his chair, surrounded by unfinished canvases. The candle beside him is almost gone, but not quite. Its flame sways gently, refusing, like him, to surrender too soon. This is how his last days unfold, not in drama or spectacle, but in stillness. No one really knows his final words, or even if anyone was there to hear them. The records say only that Rembrandt van Rijn died on the 4th of October 1669 in a small rented house, buried in an unmarked grave in Westerkerk, Amsterdam. No procession, no grand farewell. The man who once painted kings and captains left the world as quietly as a brush lifted from a canvas. And yet, doesn't that feel fitting? He spent his life turning ordinary moments into eternity. So of course, his death would arrive like a whisper. You walk through the dim room one last time. Canvases lean against the wall, their paint still tacky. A palette rests nearby, colors hardened into fossilized sunset. You find his last sketches quick lines of faces, hands, eyes. Even at the end, he was still looking, still trying to understand how light bends around a soul. Historians still argue which painting was his last. Some say the return of the prodigal son. Others insist it was a self-portrait now lost to time. But maybe that question misses the point. Every painting was his last. In some way, each one an attempt to make peace with the fleeting, the mortal, the human. There's a small, quiet myth you can't prove it, but you want to believe it, that on his final night, he sat by his candle, eyes half closed, and whispered to the flame, "I'm ready." He wasn't saying goodbye to life. He was saying goodbye to light, his oldest companion. When you step outside into the Amsterdam dusk, the air is cool, the canal still glimmering. It's easy to imagine that the city doesn't even realize what it's lost. But centuries later, the world would. His paintings would hang in galleries under perfect white lights that he'd have hated. Tourists would crowd around the night watch, unaware they're standing in the presence of a man who gave everything love, wealth, even his peace, just to understand how light touches a human face. And the irony? The same city that buried him without ceremony would one day protect his name like treasure. You walk past a museum window and see one of his self-portraits displayed there. His eyes catch yours through the glass. There's that same faint smile, half mocking, half merciful. And for a second, you feel something uncanny, like he's still here, hiding behind the varnish, watching the light move across your face the way he once did. He isn't gone. He's just become what he always chased. Light. Historians love to debate meaning faith, technique, legacy. But when you stand before his art, none of that matters. What you feel isn't admiration, it's recognition. Because in every Rembrandt painting, there's a piece of you, your weariness, your tenderness, your need to be seen and forgiven. That's what he left behind. Not beauty, not glory, but empathy. The kind that glows even in darkness. He didn't escape the dark, he taught it how to shine. And as the candle of his life finally burns out, you realize it wasn't a flame dying. It was a light passing on. You stand in the gallery now centuries away, but somehow closer than ever. The room hums with the soft murmur of visitors, shoes tapping quietly on polished floors. Around you, white walls hold the faces of the dead, and yet none of them feel gone. There he is, Rembrandt van Rijn, not as a man, but as 1,000 flickering souls, captured in strokes of amber and shadow. You walk slowly from painting to painting, and it feels like walking through his life. There's the anatomy lesson, cold, clinical, full of ambition. Then the night watch, chaotic, alive, fearless. Then the portraits of Saskia, of Hendricky, of Titus love, loss, tenderness. And finally, his own weary face, staring back at you with that faint, knowing smile. He's everywhere and nowhere, alive in pigment, gone in body. It's strange the light in his paintings feels warmer than the lights in the room. Like it's still his, still pulsing with his heartbeat. You realize what makes his art immortal isn't perfection. It's imperfection, the trembling hand, the uneven brushstroke, the humanity that refuses to vanish. He painted the world as it really is, flawed, tired, beautiful, and in doing so, he gave everyone permission to be seen the same way. A child tugs at her mother's sleeve nearby and whispers, "He painted sad people." The mother smiles softly. "No," she says, "he painted real people." You pause before the return of the prodigal son. The light is soft, golden, almost alive. The father's hands still rest on the son's back. One strong, one fragile, just as they always were. You remember what you've learned. Those hands were his own. Two halves of himself, the one that sinned and the one that forgave. It hits you then. Rembrandt's story isn't about art or fame or even tragedy. It's about forgiveness. The long, slow, human kind. The kind that takes a lifetime to learn. Historians still debate what he believed in: God, truth, love, or simply light. But maybe they're all the same thing. Maybe he spent his entire life trying to paint something you can't touch, but can only feel: grace. When you look closer, you notice something small. The way every shadow in his work has depth, not emptiness. His darkness was never hollow. It was full of meaning, of memory, of warmth. That's the miracle. He didn't use light to banish darkness. He used it to complete it. Outside, the evening sun begins to fade, and the museum guards start guiding people toward the exit. You turn for one last look. The paintings remain where they've always been, glowing, patient, eternal. And as you leave, you carry something with you. Not an image, not a fact, but a feeling that no matter how dark life gets, somewhere inside it, there's still light waiting to be found. You think of him again, the miller's son from Leiden, the man who painted beggars like kings and kings like beggars, the man who lost everything and still found beauty in loss, the man who, with nothing left but color and faith, proved that art could outlive pain. And as you step into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting off the canal, you whisper what he must have known in his final breath: light doesn't die when darkness falls. It just learns to glow differently. The night is still. The hum of the world softens. Somewhere, a candle burns low, its flame trembling steady, fragile, eternal. You close your eyes and imagine him, that old painter, alone with his brush, the scent of oil and earth still lingering in the air. He's gone, yes, but the light he painted, that gentle, forgiving light, it's still here, somewhere, touching your face as you drift closer to sleep. There's comfort in that, isn't there? Knowing that something born from grief can still glow centuries later. That someone who lived in shadow could leave behind so much warmth. You think of all the faces he painted: Saskia's laughter, Hendricky's tenderness, Titus's quiet strength. And you realize he never really painted them. He painted love. The kind that stays, even when everything else leaves. You breathe in, slow and deep. You feel the darkness around you, but now it doesn't scare you, because you remember what he taught without words, that the dark isn't the enemy of light. It's what makes light possible. The candle flickers again. The world fades softer. You imagine that Rembrandt's spirit, patient, kind, curious, lingers somewhere just beyond the glow, still watching, still learning how light bends around souls. And before sleep takes you, you whisper to the dark, "Thank you for staying." The flame steadies, the room sighs, and the story of Rembrandt, the man who captured light to escape the dark, finally settles into silence.